Hey, this is Kelly. You're listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Today I'm in conversation with Jessica Post, the president of the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee. Once you've gotten all inspired about the importance of state legislatures, make sure to check out National Run for Office Day on Tuesday, November 12th. You can check it out at runforofficeday.com. Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Demcast family of podcasts, and I am on today with Jessica Post, who is the president of the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, also known as DLCC. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Kelly. I'm so excited to join you.
Yes, I am super excited to be speaking with you. So for listeners' information, we are recording this on Thursday, November 7th, and 2 days ago was a pretty exciting election day.
We are delighted. I walked around the other day and high-fived our whole team here at the DLCC because we are over the moon about flipping both the Virginia House and Senate. It's been 20-some years since we've had a trifecta Democratic control of the Virginia government. Now Democrats have that. At the DLCC, we were major players. We put in nearly $2 million and so much staff time. It was like our whole staff was an extension of the folks in Virginia to win that election. So we all had a lot of skin in the game, so to speak, and we did everything we can to deliver that victory. So we're in a great place. We also had a huge win. I grew up in the St. Louis suburbs. We flipped a Trump plus 11 seat with a woman named Trish Gunby. The DLCC was a contributor to that, but it was a red to blue Democratic flip in the St. Louis suburbs in a place that used to be ruby red. It certainly was where I grew up.
That's amazing. I love it. All right. So we're going to dig more into that. But can we talk a little bit about you and how you got to be president of the DLCC, what your background is? And is this what you dreamed of doing as a kid?
Well, I think, to be honest with you, when I was a kid, I thought I did want to make a difference and sort of make a change in the world. And I think as I got older, I realized that the party that aligned with all my beliefs was the Democratic Party. And I could do that by working on Democratic campaigns. I watched The War Room when I was a kid and saw George Stephanopoulos and James Carville and Paul Begala and thought, maybe I could be George Stephanopoulos when I grew up. I was a college dem in school, and then I started organizing out of college and managing state legislative races. And I worked on campaigns at all levels of the ballot, moving all around the country, doing state legislative caucus work in Missouri and Minnesota, working on a presidential campaign in Iowa and out in Colorado, and then ultimately landing in Minnesota for a couple cycles, doing the coordinated campaign there in 2008, and then I was recruited to come to the DLCC to be the field director in the 2010 cycle. So I saw a lot of what happened in 2010, and I remember in the 2010 cycle, I was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, when Democrats lost 21 state legislative chambers. I was there to try to protect Democratic control of the Pennsylvania State House, and I remember they called all the other races. This was a state that had gone for Obama in 2008, and now Democrats had lost everything. And the legislative losses were the worst. We lost 21 state legislative chambers, hundreds of seats that night, and we gave Republicans a near decade-long lease on Congress. And so Harrisburg started smoking in bars. So I walked out of the smoky bar and curled up on the cold Harrisburg sidewalk and let the rain fall on me. Cried a few tears, and then I went back into the bar and popped open a Budweiser and made a call that if I had anything to do with it in 2020, I would help Democrats regain our power in state legislatures in advance of redistricting. I don't think working at the DLCC was my dream job. I think, Kelly, like a lot of us, as women, we didn't have a lot of women to look up to in these roles. So I I said I think there was some level of bias that thought like I would contribute to the effort in some way, but I might not be allowed to be in charge of it. But now here I am, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in between things, I worked at Emily's List. I did some work on the state side and on the federal side, working with pro-choice Democratic women running for U.S. Senate, Congress, and governor.
I love it. So that is super exciting. I think the thing that has been most surprising to me in sort of my political awakening over the past few years is realizing how much I care about state and local elections and didn't realize that would be the case. But help us sort of understand like why states are so important, why state legislatures are so important. And this is going to be something we need to think a lot about going into 2020 when there's going to be way more than just a few state legislatures up for grabs. So what are the things that you really focus on when you think about the importance of state legislatures?
Well, the truth is, and I think I think you, like a lot of folks, have sort of woken up to this reality, but most of the policies that affect your day-to-day life, they're made in state legislatures. So everything from where you can vote, how you can vote, can you vote early, can you vote by mail, can you vote at a voting center in the middle of a shopping mall any day of the week leading any early voting period, regardless of your precinct. What district do you live in? What's the quality of the schools your children attend? Is abortion legal in your state? And can you be fired from your job if you're LGBTQ without any remedy? And that is the case in Virginia right now. You can still be fired from your job in a number of states for being LGBTQ without any remedy, evicted from your home. And so there's a lot of those laws that really affect the day-to-day quality of life are in the states. And in addition to that, with redistricting on the horizon, in more than 30 states, the state legislatures draw both the legislative and the congressional districts. And if you think about things like voting rights, that means it affects the United States Senate map as well. If students can't vote in a state like New Hampshire, Maggie Hassan might not have been elected by the thousand-some votes that she was elected by. So all of it's really tied together, and we know we've got to build democracy from the ground up, and that's why you have to flip state legislatures to really build up the party.
So I think a lot of people are sort of familiar with the DNC and what the DNC does, but what all does the DLCC do? And especially, looking to 2020 when there's going to be lots and lots of states with, both houses that are up, how do you work on all of that at once?
Well, thank you for articulating it. It is a big scope. We'll be tracking more than 6,000 state legislative races on the ballot in the 2020 cycle. So it's a much bigger scope than what we had on the ballot this cycle with Virginia, New Jersey, Mississippi, and also Louisiana. Louisiana going to the runoff on November 16th. So one way we do it is we look at the national map and figure out what chambers can we flip red to blue. And we use our DLCC analytics program. We look at the number of seats needed. We look at the potential budget to win those seats because all the state legislative race sizes are different. And then we send out our team of regional political directors. We have 5 of them at DLCC to travel to the state and then to really customize the plan to the state and to the state laws. So those are huge, important pieces of the strategy, is that customization. Then we make strategic investments to win the state. So that may mean we're investing in data and analytics to make sure we're talking to the voters most receptive to our message. We may be doing polling in the state to see what those messages might be. In addition to that, we support the recruitment and the training of candidates and getting those important campaign tools into the hands of our campaigns to make sure our state legislative candidates are running really cutting-edge campaigns and are in a good position to win.
So one of the things, a few things have surprised me over the past couple of years looking into states a little more closely. One is how different election laws are in different places, and that really affects different state legislative seats, but also just what the job is and how different it is from a state legislative seat that is a full-time, well-compensated position in some places to basically being a part-time volunteer kind of thing in other places. How do you keep track of all of that and help the people who are interested in running understand all of those nuances?
Well, I think we have to customize our strategy by every state. So one of the first things that we do when we look at a state is think about what are the finance laws in the state. So how how does money flow in the state? How do we make strategic investments? But also, this really affects the recruitment of candidates. If, for example, in a state like New Mexico, legislators are not paid. And so they receive a level of per diem, but that really limits the people that we can talk to about running for office. A lot of folks have been motivated and want to step out to run, but in many cases, running for state legislature is a huge pay cut. In a state like New Hampshire, there's 400 state legislators in the New Hampshire Assembly, and they make $100 a year. So it's difficult. And often, sometimes people don't show up for work for that job. They don't want to show up for votes because they have to show up to their other day job. And so we have to think about, like, well, how do we get things passed if someone maybe has to be at work one of the days the legislature meets? And then on the other hand, in California, legislators are pretty well compensated.
Yeah, in Illinois, where I live, too.
Yes, and in New York. But those are full-time legislatures, right? Whereas there's an expectation that these are part-time. But, you know, in today's society, like, who can say to their, you know, I'm from Missouri, legislature is a part-time legislature, but I think many of us couldn't say to our bosses, like, you know, here's the thing, like, I won't be at work for 6 months. I'm going to need to take off a lot of time to campaign. Hopefully we can make this work. So it does limit the pool of people who can serve and become full-time legislatures. So my hope is we move to compensate legislators more. I think that's something that could really improve representational democracy.
So I think a lot of people going into next year are sort of trying to figure out how to manage their time, their volunteering dollars. You know, there's going to be so much to think about on the ballot in 2020, and a lot of people, of course, are swayed by, you know, the presidential election. But what are some things you would like people to keep in mind about volunteering for or donating to these state legislative races and helping out the DLCC?
Well, at the state legislative level, your time and resources go so much further. You'll be able to develop a personal relationship with your candidate. Sometimes you'll be door knocking on one side of the street and the candidate that you're supporting will be knocking on the other side. These are truly local races where the investment of your time or money goes so much further because the cost of these races and the scale of these races is sort of just much lower than some of the races at the federal level of the ballot. And then in addition to that, if you're looking to make an impact because you're concerned about an issue, you'll build a relationship with that state legislator if she is eventually elected. There's an example I use a lot of the times in Delaware where a state legislator was elected and he was not for medicinal marijuana. But one of the volunteers on his campaign was in need of medicinal marijuana. She had a health condition that could be impacted and sort of mitigated by that. And it changed his vote, knowing this woman. So there's a real ability to also make change and advance your positions in terms of making awareness and gaining closeness to a state house leader in terms of making an impact. So there's really multiple ways that you can make an impact on policy and make the world a little bit better through supporting a state house member.
And of course, if you're knocking on doors and getting people to vote for Democrats down ballot, they're probably going to vote for Democrats up ballot, too.
That's totally right. And I think, too, if you look at the party, if you look at a state like Wisconsin, we're setting up campaigns in rural and small town areas, and we have legislators in 405 Trump districts. So we're really holding out the party in places where the national party may not be as interested in going into, but we need to win to flip these state legislatures. And absolutely, you're making an impact that really has, what we would call an up-ticket effect. And you're also localizing the brand of the Democratic Party. There were a lot of the Republican playbook that we saw in Virginia was this message of nationalization. They wanted to say that every single Democratic legislator was a socialist and an extremist. But the ability to go in and talk about, let's talk about Western Wisconsin with a legislator named Patty Schachner. She's a county medical examiner. She rides a Harley. She hunts bears on the weekend, right? So these are folks that really represent the values of their community that have been elected and that are outside of this caricature national brand that the Republican Party is trying to put on our party. This woman was county medical examiner. She cared about mental health. She could talk so credibly about opioid addiction, and she was able to flip a Republican seat in a special election last year. Patty, will be up on the ballot again in western Wisconsin, in the Hudson area, in some of the surrounding rural areas right there on the Minnesota border, again in 2020. So that's another great way that Democratic legislators help build up our party. It shows the diversity of our party, in both racially, economically, and sort of in all ways. So this is not someone that looks like a cookie cutter Democratic politician. And I think that's something that is a great part of what we just saw about the class of legislators that was so diverse that we elected in Virginia.
So you mentioned earlier that when 2010 happened, we were sort of ceding power to the Republicans, and a lot of that has to do with redistricting. Can you talk some about the importance of winning, especially in 2020, specifically in these states?
The next decade of democracy is on the line in 2020 in state legislatures. If we lose state legislatures, that means Republicans will have the pen in their hands to draw extreme gerrymandered maps or maps that favor their party. In states like Wisconsin, North Carolina, Michigan, Democrats won the popular vote. They were able to elect Democratic governors, but we weren't able to elect a majority of Democrats in the state legislatures or a majority of Democrats to the congressional delegation. In fact, the congressional delegation in these places is super skewed. And so for the long-term health of democracy and fairness, if we flip state legislatures in all of those states, we'll either, in Michigan as a commission state, we'll be able to have Democrats hold the pen, draw fair maps, but also when Democrats win, one thing that we've seen in states where we have Democratic trifectas, they'll advance voting rights. New York just implemented automatic voter registration and early voting. So New Yorkers now had an option to vote in different ways. Those additional voting options expand the franchise and allow true democracy for a larger array of people to vote. So there's so much on the line in 2020. It's really hard to understate it.
Yeah, I think a lot about also past 2020, about like 2022 and how important that election will be. Perhaps I'm hopelessly optimistic in assuming things will go well in 2020.
Right.
But I think about 2010 and I think about how we all sort of just lost sight of what we needed to be protecting. So how do you keep people motivated past 2020? Motivation is going to be very high, but how do you keep people motivated sort of past that moment to keep thinking about the importance of states?
I think a lot of what we've had to do is communicate what our Democratic legislators were able to get accomplished in legislative sessions. For example, there was so much hopelessness on gun safety earlier this year, especially with McConnell, the guardian of gridlock, running the Senate with this garbage fire presidency. We know that we can pass great things through the U.S. House right now, but the reality is we can't get that legislation through the Senate. However, in states that are Democratic trifectas, we're passing things. That's the states where everything's happening. 300 great pieces of legislation flew through the New Mexico State House, and they did incredible things. Gun safety. They made a ton of advancements in states like New York. They put protections for Roe v. Wade into state law in the New York State Constitution. They did that in Washington, and they did that in Oregon. They did that in California. And they passed bail reform and a renters' rights package out in California. So a lot of what has kept me motivated, and I'll tell you, especially during 2017, was the action of Democratic legislators. The states really led the resistance. In some states, in New Mexico, they said, we won't sell land to Trump to build the border wall. So they've been able to pass things when they've been able to act in the lack of action coming from Washington, and they'll continue to act if Democrats can't retake the Senate or retake the presidency.
Yeah, I think that's so important. So what are some of the ways that people can get involved, can help, and can really make sure that we are really poised to flip some more state houses in 2020?
Well, I think we would love folks to check out our races.dlcc.org. That's where we highlight a variety of candidates that are running for office around the country. So you'll be able to go on as we update it throughout 2020 and see some of the DLCC spotlight races in your state. as I said, contributions at our level of the ballot go so much further. But in addition to that, if you're interested in volunteering, we now also are up on Mobilize. So you can look for volunteer phone bank opportunities on our DLCC website and take action. In addition to that, if you can get involved with one of your local elected officials, many of them have still very skeletal campaign operations. A lot of them don't, in small states like New Hampshire, folks don't have a campaign manager. They may not have somebody to manage their website or manage their social media accounts. In larger states, the campaigns have much more sort of robust campaign staffing because the districts, as we sort of talked about earlier, are much larger. And so the campaign budgets are much bigger as well. But still, action goes a long way. So if you're able to talk with your local state party, often there's great opportunities to get involved. And then I would encourage, Kelly, you to run and run for office and tell your friends to run for state legislature. It's so important. And we need more diverse voices. And certainly we need more women running for office.
I do happen to live in one of those districts where on the rare occasion that a state legislative seat opens up, 10 Democrats have declared before I even know the seat is open. So, but everyone else who's listening should run for state
That's
legislature.
Right. Well, totally think about it. And I think the other thing that we're seeing is there's folks that are running in really challenging districts to support the party. They're going out and building up organizations to like I said, sort of earlier, to restore the brand of the party, to say, look, not every person that is a farmer and a gun owner is a Republican. In some cases, they're Democrats. And look, like here's our progressive values in this area. We had a woman, Sheila Bynum Coleman, who ran a barn burner of a race against the Virginia House Speaker, and she knew it was a tough race from the beginning, but she ran such a hard race. She almost beat the Republican Speaker, but her efforts to do that helped us flip the Virginia House red to blue because it kept the Republican Speaker in his district spending money. So she would have been an incredible member of the legislature. We're heartbroken she didn't win, but the service that she did for the state of Virginia is going to allow gun safety reform to pass in Virginia, and her daughter was injured by gun violence. So those are the kinds of things that Democratic activists are stepping up to do, and running for office is really one of the bravest things you can do to put your name on the ballot. So I'd also encourage folks to consider that, or to get involved as a volunteer campaign manager, or maybe figure out a way that they could plug their skills into a campaign.
I definitely know some people who are graphic artists and can do video editing, and those people should also volunteer their time.
Exactly. Yeah, we would love their help at the state legislative level.
So I was also delighted to see that you have a DLCC store on the website, and that you have, I wish I still had a baby, because you have this adorable onesie that says future down ballot voter. My kids are a little too big now for onesies, but it's adorable. So
I think it's America's hottest baby gift right now. That's our hope.
I love it. And very beautiful bags and adult T-shirts too, of course.
Thank you. I just ordered I like my coffee black and my state legislature's blue coffee mug for myself, actually, on the store.
Love it. Is there anything else that you want to make sure we talk about?
I mean, I think we love having the opportunity, and we just want to encourage your listeners to find a state legislative race to get involved with. And if their state is and their area is blue, we'd love them to get involved nationally. And to check out the great candidates. Races.dlcc.org, you also can sort by issue area and by state. So if you're looking for, let's say, a climate advocate or a criminal justice reform advocate, all of those policies are moving at the state where they're not at the state level, while they're not moving at the federal level. So it's worth checking out a legislator and getting behind their campaign. And that's really how we're going to move the needle on these issues while there's continued Republican control of the Senate and the presidency.
Well, excellent. And we will make sure to put links up to your website on our website. And I am just so excited about what happened in Virginia, and really looking forward to flipping some more state legislatures in 2020.
We're so excited. We got to keep on flipping.
All right. Well, Jessica, thank you so much. It's been really fun to talk to you. And maybe next year, as we get closer to the 2020 election, we can check back in.
Oh, I would love that. We'd love to talk about our 2020 map as we get closer.
All right. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.